We have to move on this now. There's no more time.
My sister forged my signature on a Tuesday. I found out on a Thursday. I had not been planning to find out at all. The bank called me about a missed payment on a home equity loan I had never taken out, against a house I did not own, in the amount of $185,000. The woman on the phone had been a polite junior associate at the regional bank. She had asked me to confirm my social security number. I had confirmed it. She had asked me to confirm my date of birth. I had confirmed it. She had asked me to confirm the property address on the loan. I had asked her to read me the address. She had read me the address of my parents' house in the town I had grown up in, that I had not lived in for 14 years. I had told her there had been a mistake. She had told me there had not been a mistake. She had told me the loan had been originated 5 months earlier, with my signature on every page of the documentation, and that I had been 3 weeks late on the payments. She had told me, in the small, careful voice the polite junior associates use when they are about to ask you something they have been trained to ask, whether I had any reason to believe somebody had used my identity without my permission. I had told her I would call her back. I had hung up the phone. I had been standing in the small office at the back of my apartment in Boston, where I had been working from home that afternoon. I had been wearing my work clothes. I had been 36 years old. I had been a forensic document examiner for the previous 11 years. I had been, in particular, the kind of forensic document examiner who specialized in detecting forged signatures on financial documents. I had been one of the 7 people in the New England region who law enforcement and major banks had called when they had needed an expert opinion on whether a signature had been authentic. I had testified in 43 court cases. I had been deposed in over 100. My sister had not known what I did for a living. I want you to understand this. My sister had known I worked in finance. My sister had told the family for over a decade that I had been a paralegal at a small firm. She had been wrong. The wrongness had been because my sister had not been listening when I had told her 12 years ago what I had been training to do. She had been 17 at the time. She had been focused on other things. The not listening had been one of many small not listenings she had built into our relationship over the years. The not listening was about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. I want to tell you what I did over the next 5 weeks. I want to tell you because there are people listening to this who have a family member who has done something serious to them, and who have been told by the rest of the family to not make it into a problem, and who have been deciding whether to listen to the family or to handle the situation the way it would have been handled if the person had not been family. I want to tell you which path I took, and what happened on the morning a sheriff knocked on my parents' front door, and what the sheriff said when my mother asked him what was happening. Before I do, hit subscribe. And tell me one thing in the comments. Tell me about a moment when somebody in your family did something that would have been a crime if a stranger had done it, and the family told you to handle it as a family matter instead of as a legal one. Tell me what you decided to do. I read every single comment. Now let me take you back to the phone call from the bank. My name is Callista Voronova. I am 36 years old. I am a forensic document examiner at a small private investigative firm in Boston. My firm has 6 employees. We work on cases referred to us by law enforcement agencies, by major banks, by insurance companies, and by attorneys. The work is technical. The work is patient. The work involves long afternoons looking at the small, specific details of pen strokes under high magnification, comparing thousands of authentic signature samples against a single questioned one, and writing careful reports that have to hold up under cross-examination in court. My sister is Renata Voronova. She is 31. She has been the favored daughter for as long as I can remember. She had been the daughter who had stayed in our small Massachusetts town after high school. She had been the daughter who had been at every family event. She had been the daughter who had lived with our parents intermittently, who had borrowed money from them frequently, and who had been the recipient of, by my conservative estimate, somewhere over $200,000 in informal financial support from our parents over the previous 12 years. She had worked in retail management. She had been laid off twice. She had been, in the small, careful way some adult children settle into being a problem for their parents, the daughter who had never quite managed to support herself. I had been the daughter who had moved to Boston at 22. I had been the daughter who had paid my own way through graduate school. I had been the daughter who had not asked our parents for money since I had been 20. I had been, in the small ways our family had been organizing itself around our 2 daughters, the daughter who had been quietly providing the contrast that had let our parents tolerate Renata's pattern. As long as one of their daughters had been independent, the other one's dependence had been bearable. I had not been in close contact with my parents or Renata for several years. I had visited at Christmas. I had visited at our mother's birthday. I had not been involved in the daily life of the family. The not involvement had been, on my side, a deliberate choice. The not involvement had been, on their side, the small, careful neglect that the favored daughter pattern usually produces toward the unfavored one. I had called my parents on the Friday morning after the bank call. I had been preparing the conversation for about 14 hours. I had been preparing it with the small, careful attention I brought to depositions in my professional work. I had been planning to ask specific questions in a specific order to see what they knew before I told them what I knew. My mother had answered. I had asked her, in the careful voice I had been practicing, whether she had been aware that there had been a home equity loan on their house. She had been quiet for a moment. She had then said, "Callista, we need to talk about that. Your sister did something. We have been trying to figure out how to bring it up." I had told her I was on the way. I had hung up. I had driven to their house. I had been there in 40 minutes. My parents had been waiting at the kitchen table. My father had not been able to look at me. My mother had been holding a small mug of coffee that she had been gripping with both hands. Renata had not been there. Renata had, I would learn later, been at her boyfriend's apartment in the next town over, having been told by my mother that morning to not come home until things had been figured out. I had sat down. I had asked them what they had known. I had asked them when they had known it. I had asked them what they had been planning to do about it. My mother had told me the story. Renata had taken out the home equity loan 4 months earlier. Renata had used my signature, my social security number, and a small piece of mail that had been forwarded to my parents' house from a previous address of mine to construct the application. Renata had done all of this because she had needed money to pay back a different loan she had taken out from a private lender, with a high interest rate, that she had been unable to make the payments on. The original loan had been $40,000. The interest had compounded over 2 years to over 60. Renata had been afraid the private lender would do something bad. Renata had decided, in the small calculating way some people decide things when they are desperate, that taking out a larger loan against our parents' house, using my identity, would solve the immediate problem. My parents had found out about the loan 3 weeks earlier, when the bank had sent them a small piece of mail about a routine matter. They had confronted Renata. Renata had admitted everything. My parents had been horrified for about an hour. My parents had then, in the careful way they had been managing Renata her whole life, decided that the family was going to handle the situation quietly. They had been planning to pay off the loan over time, using their retirement savings while convincing me, when I eventually found out, that the right thing for the family was to not pursue any formal action against Renata. My mother had said, in the voice she had been using on me for 36 years, "Callista, do not make this into a problem. She is your sister. We will figure it out. We have already started figuring it out. Please do not do anything that will damage the family." I had been quiet for a long moment. I had then asked them a question. I had asked them whether they understood that what Renata had done was identity theft and bank fraud. I had asked them whether they understood that what Renata had done was a federal crime. I had asked them whether they understood that the loan documents, which had been signed by Renata using my signature, constituted a criminal offense that carried, in our state, a potential prison sentence of up to 20 years. My mother had stopped breathing for a second. My father had looked up at me for the first time since I had walked in. They had not, until that moment, fully understood what Renata had done. They had been thinking about it as a family financial misunderstanding. They had not been thinking about it as a crime. I had told them, in the careful, professional voice I used in court, that I had 2 options in front of me. I had told them I could let the family handle it. I had told them that if I let the family handle it, the loan would be paid off slowly over the next decade. Renata would continue her pattern, our parents' retirement would be destroyed, and I would have to live with the knowledge that I had let a serious crime go unpursued because the perpetrator had been my sister. I had then told them my second option. I had told them that I could pursue this professionally. I had told them that I had the technical evidence necessary to demonstrate that my signature had been forged. I had told them I could file a formal report with the FBI's Boston field office, which handled federal financial crimes. I had told them I could provide expert testimony, in my own case, as a forensic document examiner. I had told them I could have my sister arrested, charged, prosecuted, and likely convicted within a year. My mother had started crying. She had told me I would never do that. She had told me Renata was my sister. She had told me the family would not survive it. I had told her I had not yet decided which option I was going to take. I had told her I would let her know within a week. I had stood up. I had left their house. I had driven back to Boston. I want to tell you what I did over the next 5 weeks, because the 5 weeks are the part of the story that mattered. I did not call them back within a week. I did not call them back at all. I had spent the first 3 days after the visit thinking carefully about the two options. I had been thinking about them the way I thought about evidence in my professional work. I had been weighing the costs and the benefits of each path. The family handling option had several costs. It would require my parents to spend their retirement savings paying off Renata's debt. It would let Renata continue her pattern, which she had been refining for over a decade, and which she would not stop on her own. It would also require me to participate, by my silence, in a fraud that had been committed against me. The participating would have been, in legal terms, a kind of acquiescence to identity theft against my own person. The acquiescence would have been a personal choice. The personal choice would have, however, set a precedent in our family that any future misbehavior by Renata would also be handled internally. The precedent would have been the end of the line on my own protection within our family. The professional handling option had different costs. It would result in criminal charges against my sister. It would result in serious consequences for her. It would alienate my parents, possibly permanently. It would create a public record of a family situation that I had been keeping private for 36 years. It would also, I knew from my professional experience, take a long time. The prosecution would take a year. The sentencing would take additional months. The family fallout would take years. I had decided, on the third day, to take the professional path. I want to tell you why. I had decided because I had been thinking about all the other women whose signatures had been forged by family members, who had been told by their families to not make it into a problem, and who had eventually found themselves in their 50s or 60s looking back at a pattern of family financial damage that had been ongoing for decades. I had seen these women in my professional work. I had been an expert witness in several of their cases. The women had usually arrived at me too late. By the time they had decided to pursue formal action, the family member who had been forging their signatures had usually moved on to other victims, or had drained the family's resources, or had built a pattern that had become impossible to fully document. The women had usually been wishing they had acted sooner. I had decided I was going to be the woman who acted sooner. I had called my friend Imelda, who had been a federal prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston for 14 years, and who had been one of the prosecutors I had worked with on previous cases. I had told her, off the record, what had happened. I had asked her to walk me through the process. She had walked me through it carefully. She had told me, when we had finished, that she could not represent the case herself because of our professional relationship, but that she would refer me to a colleague who handled financial crime intake. I had met with the colleague on the following Monday. I had brought the documentation the bank had sent me. I had brought my own professional credentials. I had explained the situation. The colleague, an assistant U.S. attorney named Mr. Beauregard Kowalski, had told me he would open a formal investigation. He had told me the investigation would take roughly 4 to 6 weeks before charges could be filed. He had told me a sheriff or federal marshal would, depending on the jurisdictional decisions, eventually serve the arrest warrant. I had given them everything they had needed. I had provided my expert analysis of the forged signature, which I had completed in my own time, in my own home office, on the documents the bank had provided me. The analysis had been clean. The forgery had been obvious to me within 20 minutes. Renata had not been a careful forger. Renata had used a basic tracing technique on a piece of mail of mine that had contained my signature, which she had photocopied. The pen pressure had been wrong. The stroke direction on the lowercase letters had been wrong. The end-of-word lifts had been wrong in 7 different places across the signature pages of the loan application. Any forensic examiner would have caught it within a single afternoon. The investigation had moved quickly. Mr. Kowalski had been thorough. He had subpoenaed the bank's records, the closed-circuit footage from the day Renata had walked into the loan office for the in-person closing, and the records of the private lender who had been Renata's original creditor. He had built a complete case in about 4 weeks. I had not contacted my parents during those 5 weeks. I had not contacted Renata. I had been waiting for the system to do what the system did. I had been continuing my regular work. I had been having dinner with my partner Sage, who was a high school chemistry teacher, who had known the situation from the beginning, and who had been steady throughout in the small, useful way Sage was always steady. On a Wednesday morning in the 5th week, a sheriff's deputy had knocked on the front door of my parents' house at 7:30 in the morning. My mother had answered the door. My father had been in the kitchen making coffee. Renata had been upstairs in her old bedroom, where she had been staying for the previous several months. I want to tell you what the sheriff had said because I have heard the story from 3 different family members and from Mr. Kowalski, who had been notified by the deputy that the warrant had been served. The sheriff had been a man in his 50s named Deputy Cassander Brennan. He had been polite. He had asked my mother whether Renata Voronova had been at the residence. My mother had said yes. The sheriff had asked her to please ask Renata to come downstairs. My mother had asked him what was happening. The sheriff had looked past my mother. He had looked at my father, who had been standing in the kitchen doorway with a small coffee mug. The sheriff had looked back at my mother. He had said in the careful professional voice that sheriff's deputies use when they are serving a federal warrant on a member of a family, "Ma'am, I have a federal arrest warrant for your daughter Renata Voronova on charges of identity theft and bank fraud. I am going to need you to ask her to come downstairs. She is going to need to come with me. She is going to be processed at the federal courthouse this morning. I am sorry to be doing this at your home. I am asking you, ma'am, to please cooperate." My mother had not been able to move for a moment. My father had set down his coffee mug. He had been the one who had walked upstairs to get Renata. Renata had come down in a small set of pajamas. She had not been crying. She had been very pale. She had been, by every account, eerily calm. She had been processed, in the way Mr. Kowalski had described it would happen, at the federal courthouse later that morning. My mother had called me at 11 that morning. I had been at my office. I had let the call go to voicemail. My mother had left a message. The message had been long. The message had been incoherent in places. The message had been, in the careful way you can hear a person you have known your whole life processing a situation in real time, the message of a woman who had finally understood that she had been wrong about the structure of our family for 36 years. I had not called her back that day. I had not called her back the next day. I had called her back on the third day. We had talked for 2 hours. The conversation had not been a reconciliation. The conversation had been the beginning of a different kind of conversation than the one we had been having for 36 years. The conversation had been about what kind of mother she had been. The conversation had been about what kind of daughter Renata had been. The conversation had been about what kind of family we had been. The conversation had been honest, in places, for the first time in my adult life. I want to tell you what has happened in the 4 months since. Renata pleaded guilty to identity theft and bank fraud in the 3rd month. She was sentenced last week. The sentence had been 28 months in federal prison, with 3 years of supervised release, with a requirement to pay full restitution to the bank, and with a permanent record of the federal conviction. She is scheduled to begin her sentence in 2 weeks. My parents are paying the bank back themselves. The bank had been willing to reach a settlement with them, given that I had been the technical victim of the fraud and had cooperated with the prosecution. The settlement had required my parents to pay back the principal of the loan in monthly installments over the next 11 years. The settlement had not required them to pay the interest, which the bank had absorbed as part of the resolution. The settlement was going to be hard on them financially. They would be working into their late 70s. They would be making it work. My parents and I have been in tentative contact. We have had 2 more long phone conversations. The conversations have been about the past more than the present. My mother has been doing the work of understanding what she had built in our family. She had been a complicated woman. She had not been a cruel woman. She had been, like a lot of mothers, somebody who had organized her own anxiety by selecting one daughter to invest in and one daughter to expect things from. The selecting had been the seed of everything that had grown from it. She had been understanding this slowly. The understanding had not been a single revelation. The understanding had been a series of small, careful realizations she had been having since the morning the sheriff had been at her door. My father has been quieter. He had been the parent who had been less complicit, in the sense that he had not been the architect, and the parent who had been more complicit, in the sense that he had been the one who had failed to intervene for 36 years. He has been calling me on his own, separately from my mother, about once a week. The calls have been short. The calls have been about small things. The calls have been the small, careful work of a man who is trying to be a different kind of father in his last 15 or 20 years than he had been in his first 36. I have not visited my parents' house since the morning I had driven there to confront them. I am not sure when I will. I am not in a hurry. Renata wrote me a letter from the holding facility. The letter had been 4 pages long. The letter had been an apology. The letter had also been, in places, an attempt to manipulate me into asking the judge for leniency before the sentencing. I had not asked the judge for leniency. I had not responded to the letter. I had filed it in the small box where I keep documentation of the case, in case I ever need it in the future. I want to tell you what I have learned, because the learning has been the part of this experience that has been the most useful to me. The first thing I have learned is that the families who tell you to handle serious wrongs as a family matter, instead of as a legal matter, are usually the families who have been trained to absorb wrongdoing in the same direction for generations. The families have organized themselves around protecting the wrongdoer at the expense of the victim. The protecting is the pattern. The pattern continues as long as the victims keep agreeing to the family matter framing. The pattern ends, in most cases, only when one of the victims finally refuses the framing and uses the formal systems that are available. The refusal is hard. The refusal feels disloyal. The refusal is, however, the only thing that ever ends a pattern that has been allowed to compound for decades. If you have a family member who has done something to you that would be a crime if a stranger had done it, please consider the possibility that the family matter framing is the pattern itself. The framing is not a neutral response to the wrong. The framing is a tool that has been used by your family for years to protect the wrongdoer from consequences. The tool can be set down. The setting down is your choice. The choice is yours alone. The second thing I have learned is that the formal systems exist for a reason. The criminal justice system is imperfect in many ways. The criminal justice system also, in cases of identity theft and financial fraud, works well enough to provide consequences for wrongdoing that families would otherwise be unable to provide. The provision of consequences is what makes a wrong actually be a wrong. Without consequences, the wrong is just an unpleasant family memory. With consequences, the wrong becomes a part of the actual record of the wrongdoer's life. The record is what changes the wrongdoer's future behavior, or what makes them institutionally accountable to the next person they try to harm. The formal systems do this work. The families almost never do this work. If you have access to the formal systems, please use them when the wrong is serious enough. The using of them is not a betrayal of your family. The using of them is a protection of your future self, of the wrongdoer's future victims, and of the integrity of your own life. The protection is the point. The using is the mechanism. The third thing I have learned, and the last one I want to give you, is that the family members who told you not to make it a problem are themselves going to be changed by your decision to make it a problem. My mother and father were going to spend the rest of their lives in a particular relationship with my sister, with me, and with each other, that had been built around the assumption that they would always be allowed to manage problems internally. The morning the sheriff arrived at their door, that assumption ended. My parents have been doing the work, in the 4 months since, of understanding what a different kind of family would look like. The work is slow. The work is painful for them. The work is, however, real. The work would not have started without the consequences. The consequences had been the thing that had finally made the work necessary. If you are afraid that pursuing formal consequences will destroy your family, please consider that the family was already structured in a way that needed destroying. The family that survives the consequences will be a different family. The different family may be smaller. The different family may be more honest. The different family may be the only family that is actually capable of growing, over the years that follow, into something worth being part of. The destruction was not the end of family. The destruction was the beginning of a family that had the chance to be real for the first time. The chance is the gift the consequences provided. The taking of the chance is what your parents and your siblings are going to have to decide, in their own time, whether they are willing to do. Some of them will, some of them will not. Either way, you will be the kind of person who used the formal systems when the formal systems were needed, and that will be the foundation of the rest of your own life, regardless of what anybody else decides to do with the chance you provided them. I want to ask you something before you go. Tell me in the comments about a moment when somebody in your family did something that would have been a crime if a stranger had done it, and the family told you to keep it private. Tell me what you decided to do. Tell me whether you used the formal systems or whether you let the family handle it. Tell me what you learned from your decision. Tell me, if you have not yet decided, what you have been weighing. There are more of us than the families who told us to keep things private would ever guess. We have been finding each other, in small, careful ways, for years. Tell me yours. I will be reading every single comment. I will see you in the next one.